Cape Town Harbour is one of the biggest ports in Africa, on one of the world's busiest trade routes. The first jetty was built in 1654. Originally a supply port for ships travelling between Holland and Indonesia, it grew rapidly. Today, Cape Town Harbour handles more than 3,000 vessels a year. When we think of a modern harbour, this is generally how we see it. But the sheltered waters and man-made structures attract other species as well. One in particular. And that can create problems. In 2017, seemingly overnight, thousands of swift terns descended onto a waterfront building.
There was masses of guano. That was the guano was the smell. The ammonia was the smell. A dreadful, dreadful smell. And we were still getting some of the smell sort of permeating the air ducts, and you could see bird feathers and things like that coming into the air ducts. When you came outside, there was a racket. And of course, the amount of white guano on the floor out here was immense.
Where did they come from, and why were they there? Whenever there's an animal mystery to solve at the waterfront, Brett Glasby gets the call.
In 2017, we had a massive colony there, approximately 2,500 pairs of birds. And the fact is, when they started roosting and nesting, most people didn't even notice what was happening. The reason for that is that they start their breeding season in the Christmas break, right before Christmas and New Year's, when majority of the staff are on leave and not in the building. So when the staff come back from their annual leave in the middle of January, by then these birds have already established themselves, they've laid their eggs, they're down and roosting and ready to go for the season. And once they're on the building, we have to then work with them because of the legalities around moving eggs. So we do not remove eggs or chicks once they've nested.
The reason the terns chose this environment comes down to a number of factors.
One of the reasons why seabirds are doing well in the vicinity of Cape Town in Table Bay is the harbour is a fishing exclusion zone, so there's no commercial fishing for anchovies and sardines close to the harbour because it would get in the way of shipping traffic. So there's effectively a marine protected area right in the centre of Cape Town because of the harbour. So that creates food availability. The primary motivation as to where to breed is where there's food. And then once there's food, then they're looking for somewhere safe to breed where they're not going to have their eggs or chicks eaten. And the obvious place to breed is on Robben Island. But during the sort of 2000s, there was a sequence of disturbances on Robben Island. People went into the colonies, there were some cats on the island, and that caused the birds to look for other nesting opportunities. And some of them started breeding in the waterfront, and they found that the buildings in the waterfront were quite a nice place to breed. They didn't have too many problems there, and so the numbers increased.
Our seabirds naturally nest on islands, normally on the ground. There's no real predators in the island, so what they do is they nest on ground level, they lay their eggs, hatch them out, raise their chicks, and they fly off. But obviously in the built environment, there's no islands to nest on, except for the artificial ones we've created by building buildings with flat roofs, and then we go and add to that by weighing down all the waterproofing on the roof with stone chip. So this stone chip over here is absolutely perfect for the nesting. So what birds do is it's similar to the sand on an island. They go and they create a little depression, kick the stones around, and they will lay their egg inside that depression. Now if the roof was solid cement, that egg would just roll away. But because there's this depression, they lay their egg there. The egg is quite safe, it's not going to roll anywhere. The stones get nice and warm in the sunlight, so the egg stays at a pretty good temperature. It's a perfect environment for the birds, and essentially it's predator free, it's an island, it is got the perfect substrate, and that's why they like it.
Further exacerbating the problem, it was then found that the colony on the Nedbank building had become infected with the H5N8 avian flu virus. This created a potential infection risk, not just for other birds, but possibly even other species. Dr. Luca Mendes, the aquarium's consulting vet, explains.
So avian influenza, or bird flu, is a highly contagious disease caused by the avian influenza type A viruses. Normally this virus occurs amongst wild aquatic birds worldwide, but when these birds come into contact with other animal hosts or domestic birds, such as the commercial poultry industry, we can sometimes see massive mortalities, which ultimately lead to devastating financial losses. What's more is that this virus, or this group of viruses, has been known to jump animal hosts completely, and sporadic cases of humans infected with bird flu viruses have been documented in other parts of the world.
For Brett, culling the birds was unacceptable. There was nothing they could do in the 2017 breeding season. Nature would have to take its course. But for the future, there had to be a way of relocating the birds without harming them or their chicks.
Now, we don't want birds in the waterfront gone though. They add to the ambience, it is their environment, we do want them here, we just don't want them in colonies. So the idea was to take 1,000 birds from one roof and split it over 20 or 30 roofs. So at first, one of the things that we trial ran was active patrolling of these roofs. So between myself and our 2 seal monitors or wildlife monitors, we took turns, and every single day we went onto the affected roofs and we simply did a quick walk around on the roof. Now it worked very, very well. It was highly effective but very labor intensive. So we had to investigate other measures. How do we do this? Well, we make the roofs that are colonies undesirable. We went with bird wires. So these are high tensile stainless steel wires, and they are spaced 20 centimeters apart. Now it does 2 things. One, if the bird is flying over, he'll see the glinting light coming off these wires, and they don't like anything that flashes or reflects light, so that just deters them. The second thing is, if they do decide to still approach the flashing light and they come down with this spacing, as soon as their wings touch the wires, they realize they can't go all the way down. It gives them a bit of a fright and they go back up again. There are over 100 buildings in the space, in the waterfront. We had them nesting in 2017 on 4 out of 100 buildings. So what we've done is we haven't completely excluded those buildings. Every building has a small space that's still left for them, and we are taking that colony and essentially just spreading it over more roofs.
No sooner had the tern nesting problem been solved when another raised its head. This time, it was the cormorants, and it was human behavior that was affecting them.
So the Cape cormorant in Afrikaans is called a trekduiker. So whenever you see a big line of cormorants flying out at sea, sometimes 10, 20,000 cormorants, they travel in big groups. Their preference is to feed on pelagic schooling fish. So again, anchovy and sardine, the same thing that the gannets and the penguins and the swift terns are looking for. So they travel in groups, and once one group finds it, everybody else sees, oh, they're all landing, we'll go over there. And again, because the harbour area is a no-go fishing area, it's a little hotspot for food for these guys. But in addition to feeding on pelagic fish, which they catch in midwater, they're also, like any other cormorant, quite proficient at feeding on benthic fish. So they can, if there's no anchovy and sardine in the area, then they'll feed on sand gobies and other things that live on the sea floor. And they can dive down to about 40 meters comfortably.
The problem was, every time it rained, there was an increase in cormorants entangled in plastic. What was the connection between birds in distress and rainy days?
So typically cormorants nest on islands, and normally on the ground. They build their nest out of any natural materials they can find. So grasses, reeds, seaweeds, and they build up a nest, and it's normally around 15 centimeters thick and around 35 centimeters in diameter. On that, they'll lay 2 eggs and they raise 2 chicks per season. Now, obviously the cormorants that we've got here are not on an island. They're not on the ground. They are building nests in the urban environment. So they collect whatever they can find. Here in the urban environment, that's typically rope, fishing line, fishing nets. We found t-shirts in there, cable ties, essentially plastic. The majority of it is plastic items. And every year they build their new nest on top of the old one. So it starts to be a bit like a high-rise apartment block, or if you look at it, a layered cake. Now, when we've done studies on these nests and we've taken abandoned nests and dismantled them, weighed them and evaluated them, we found that more than 75% of the nest was artificial materials, bulk of it being plastic.
So occasionally, they'll use a piece of fishing line or a rope that's got a loop in it, and then sometimes the adult, but more normally the chicks, as they start to exercise and move around the nest, might manage to get a loop of that material tangled around their leg or neck or something, and if they can't get free, then they get stuck, and the more they pull, the tighter it gets.
And we then have to come, get those chicks off the nest, rescue them, cut the plastic off, and then obviously return them back to their parents, back to the same nest they were on when they got entangled.
But that still doesn't answer the question. Why were entanglements peaking during rainy days? To help find the answer, Claire Taylor from the Two Oceans Aquarium took us to where one of the city's rivers empties into the harbour.
So I think what people forget is that rivers and of course the wind that we have in Cape Town all connect all the areas around Cape Town to the sea. All drains lead to the sea as well. So whether you're living near the coastline or in the southern suburbs quite far inland, everything you discard may still end up in the sea and still affect seabirds, seals, turtles, whatever may come across it. So one must never feel that you're actually not attached to the ocean just because you don't live right on the coastline. There are quite a few inlets right into Cape Town Harbour that our rivers actually lead into. So a lot of your waste products that are potentially blown into rivers or just come down the streams are actually into the harbour, and that's where it's going to come in contact with a lot of your seabirds, a lot of your seals that have come into the harbour, and animals as well. And then from there, actually, obviously, the currents just take the waste even further out to sea, which affects even more animals.
The V&A Waterfront collaborates closely with Two Oceans Aquarium to help remove pollution and keep the waters as safe as possible for the wildlife that lives in the harbour.
We've put 2 boats onto the water. They're up here every day through our canals, through our water basins, collecting all of the rubbish that blows into the harbour. It's quite an extensive operation. Of course, aesthetically, we're managing a type of environment where people are walking along the waterways, they enjoy seeing healthy wildlife interactions in the water. So it's become important for us as part of our wildlife management program that we keep a clean water environment, a clean bird life environment, just for the human interaction and enjoyment of a waterfront. What we have is a massive sorting area. We have a huge amount of bins across the property, and so it's just important, your cup of coffee, your screw top from your water bottle, please make sure that those end up in the bins, and that's just very important because what you see going out into the oceans plays out right in front of you. If you're walking along our waterways and you're walking away our basins, you can appreciate the health of the wildlife environment that we have within the waterfront.
So whilst we are sharing our environment with these wild animals, part of that is managing our waste so that these animals do not become injured or entangled.
So I think, often people think it's a very confusing thing, but a simple change in your behaviour will make actual life and death change to animals at sea, especially seabirds.
All over the planet, humans continue to encroach onto previously wild spaces. Simply because we are the apex species, does that give us the right to occupy their spaces? Spaces where they have lived for millennia? The least we can do is be mindful of their needs and be responsible with our waste. It's the neighbourly thing to do.